Hello and welcome to a new series that I'm starting called Ink and Earth, where I talk about books for the Anthropocene. Today I'm going to talk about 4 novels that I felt really captured both the exquisite beauty of nature and the grief of losing it. They really look at the relationships between all living things, from trees to insects to birds to fish to humans. And that's why I'm categorising them more as eco-fiction. Even though climate fiction is an increasingly recognised genre, I feel like climate fiction, it tends to be about specifically the climate crisis. It tends to often overlap with sci-fi. It's very often dystopian, and while a couple of these books do meet those criteria, I feel like they're more about ecology, which by definition is the relationship between living organisms and their environment. And I think it's that focus that makes them so powerful for both celebrating and grieving nature. So the first book I wanted to talk about is When I Sing, Mountains Dance by Irene Solà, or translated by Mara Faye Letham. It's about a community in the Pyrenees and how they are affected by their landscape, by war and what happens after war. And what I think is so wonderful about this book is that it gives a really direct voice to nature without anthropomorphizing or humanizing it. I was absolutely blown away by the first chapter, even just the first lines, because it's written from the perspective of a storm, which sounds like it could be cheesy or fall into cliches, but actually it really, really works. We arrived with full bellies, painfully full, black bellies, burdened with cold, dark water, lightning bolts and thunderclaps. We came from the sea and from other mountains and from unthinkable places, and we'd seen unthinkable things. We scratched at the rock atop the peaks as if we bore salt, to ensure not even weeds would sprout there. We chose the colour of the hills and the fields, and the gleams in rivers and the glints in upward glancing eyes. I just think that is so beautifully done. And there are later chapters that are written from the perspective of a young deer. There's another one from the perspective of chanterelle mushrooms, and some even from the mountains themselves. And this gives so much agency and power and life to creatures and to things that we don't even normally consider to be alive. And what's really well done in the writing is that they do still feel a little bit alien. They're clearly not human, and yet they make sense and we can relate to them. Hello, bee. Okay, bye-bye. But there is a really strong theme of mourning throughout this novel. It's set just after a war, and there's also a particular death that's like a red thread throughout the novel. You get all kinds of grief, human grief, but you also get the grief of change, the change that comes on different timescales, the changing of geology with the forming and the shifting of the mountains, but also the change of a community as the people move away from the mountains and a way of life kind of dies, this way of life that's very entwined with nature. So yeah, I think this book is really fantastic. Every single line feels like poetry. I read it last summer, and I'd take it down to the lake and I'd read lying next to the water, just a chapter or two, and I think that is the way to read it, outside and nice and slowly. The next book I wanted to talk about is Migrations by Charlotte McConaghy, or I actually read it in Swedish, Den sista migrationen, translated by Carina Jansson. I don't have my copy, I gave it away to a friend, but it is set in a near-ish future where the vast majority of wildlife has gone extinct, and it's about a woman who is trying to follow the very last Arctic tern colony. Now, I love swimming in the lakes here in Sweden, and the main character of this book loves to swim in the sea, no matter how cold it is. Now, that's not quite me, but I really loved how this book captured the power of live swimming, that sense of aliveness in your own body, but also from the moving, living water. And I don't know if it's really the thing that most people would pick up on this book, but I just felt it really captured and celebrated water and the sea. But of course the book is primarily about birds, and I definitely learned a lot about birds reading this book, their myriad ways of living and their incredible journeys across the earth. And once again, the mourning in this book is dealt with quite literally. there are scenes where there are characters grappling with the morality of their own survival at the cost of all of the loss around them. And I think something that the book, just the way it's written and everything that it covers, really captures the paradox of life, both the resilience and the fragility of life. The fact that humans can survive so much, the fact that birds can migrate across incredibly dangerous journeys, the fact that there is ice on the North and South Poles that has been there for thousands of years. And yet all of these things, at the same time as being incredibly resilient, are also very, very fragile. A human can die in a moment, a species can go extinct, and the ice has started melting. And I was so inspired by this contrast, this tension between both resilience and fragility, that I actually wrote a song kind of trying to capture this feeling. She only feels alive when her breath is hard as ice. She only feels alive when her feet abandon soil. She only feels alive when alone in salty depths. She never feels alone when her blood meets its kind. Oh. And if you'd like to hear the rest of that song, it is out now. It's called Migrations. My artist name is Inkpen. You can find it on all of the platforms. But on to the next book. The Impossible Resurrection of Grief by Octavia Cade. Like Migrations, it's set in an undefined, near-ish future where there's basically been a mass extinction of species. And this has caused a kind of epidemic of grief with a capital G. The grief is this very, very extreme depression that comes as a result of seeing all of this loss. The author is a biologist, so it has detailed descriptions of species, of landscapes, and I think it really powerfully captures the individuality of each species and place. And a bit like Migrations, there's also opposing yet complementing themes of resilience and fragility. There are species that will actually thrive in a warming world, whilst others die out. So it raises the moral questions, and the characters deal very directly with the moral questions of who should get to survive, and should humans try and influence and control that? Which is a question that we're actually already facing today with invasive species. Now, I was really impressed with how head-on this book dealt with the psychological question of ecological loss. We already know that nature deficit disorder is an acknowledged thing, and this book really asks us very directly, if we were surrounded by absolute mass extinction, mass loss of animals and creatures and plants, how would that affect us psychologically? It actually doesn't seem that extreme, the idea that we might go a little bit stir crazy. But I will warn you that this book seems to be Marmite. When I've looked through the reviews, people seem to either love it or they hate it. I'm in a weird position where I can kind of taste both. I think there are some elements about the writing that feels a little bit undeveloped, a little bit confusing, but I think it depends how you come to it. It's not like your typical science fiction book. This is a very short scream of rage and grief. It's not hopeful. You are not going to come out of it feeling better, but I think it has that cathartic element that I think is quite powerful and quite important. The final book I wanted to talk about is The Overstory by Richard Powers, which is by far the most well-known of all the books I'm going to talk about today. But I borrowed it from the library a few months back, and I've got to say, the hype is worth it. It's about 8 different characters and how their lives are intertwined, not only with each other, but also with the trees around the globe. And the way that the narrative captures how trees are woven in so many ways into our lives was just such a beautiful honouring of how important trees are to humanity. And the main chunk of the book is a kind of fictionalised account of the campaigns that happened in the 1980s in the US to save the redwoods. So it deals very directly with the loss of forests and of ancient trees. And it was also quite educational. I mean, it's not quite exactly what happened, but it's sort of next to what happened. You can kind of match up the characters to real life people a little bit. And I think what this book does most of all is it questions the assumption that trees are just an inanimate object to cut down for our own use. Much like with When I Sing Mountains Dance, it gives character and life to trees without humanising them. And it makes you care about every single one. It makes you respect what incredible lives every tree has, and how they become an entire ecosystem unto themselves and a home for so many other creatures, and how wrong it is that we think that we can just take that all away in a matter of minutes with a chainsaw. The Overstory hit me so hard. I cried so many times, with hope, with grief. I think it hit me particularly hard because of my previous experience with forestry activism, but honestly, I think this book could really speak to anyone. All of these books teach us that our lives are so interconnected in ways that we often don't see. We're interconnected not just with our local human community, but also our global human community, with the animals we encounter every day, with the trees that give us the air to breathe, with the soil that lets us grow. So I felt like a real message that I took away from reading all of these books was how important it is to fight for conservation. I think often in environmental discussions we get bogged down with talk of CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases and global heating, and of course that is like super urgent and really needs to be talked about, but at the same time there is so much value in working to save every life, every ecosystem, every landscape, every species. For me, there is a remarkably biodiverse meadow near to my home. It keeps being touted for housing development, and I've already been keeping my eye on it, but these books really solidified my motivation to protect that meadow at all costs. And I can almost guarantee that whoever you are and wherever you are watching this video, there will be a landscape, a species, a tree under threat in your local vicinity. And I really recommend go read these books, these wonderful books, and then do everything you can to fight to protect that piece of nature that you can call home. So thank you so much for watching, and if you have read or are planning to read any of these books, please let me know, and let me know what you think of them. Personally, up next I'm going to be reading Binas Historia, or History of the Bees by Maya Lunde, another big eco-fiction classic that I've just not got round to yet. And I think this will very much be continuing the theme of grieving and celebrating nature. Don't forget to check out my song Migrations if you would be interested in that, and subscribe if you would like to see more of Ink and Earth, where I talk about books for the Anthropocene. I will now leave you with a moment of nature in her generous and creative wisdom.